This is SelfWork, and I'm Dr. Margaret Rutherford. At SelfWork, we discuss psychological and emotional issues and what you can do about them, whether that's learning self-acceptance, taking action, or seeking therapy or treatment. 10 years ago, I extended the walls of my practice to reach those of you who might already be knowledgeable about mental health treatment, but also to those of you who might say you'd never darken the door of a therapist. And yet, you are here. I'll answer your questions while I invite you to take a few minutes for your own self-work.
Because their nervous system calms down. And in my opinion, you can't heal trauma unless you work on the nervous system. Mm-hmm. That's where trauma lives. And Gabor Mate says that trauma isn't what happens to you. It's a psychic wound that happens as a result of what happened to you. And I couldn't agree with that more.
Welcome to this week's edition of SelfWork. 194 million Americans, more than 76% of the population, are living with chronic illness. Now, many eventually stabilize, but what happens when the body heals and you still don't feel safe inside of it? Patient advocate and health coach Amy Kurtz knows this gap in our healthcare system firsthand. Having gone to 36 doctors trying to find out what was the source of her symptoms, she was already exhausted from that decades-long effort. Finally, hearing the diagnosis of late-stage neurological Lyme disease with co-infections and getting the right treatment, her labs started to improve. But as her body began to stabilize, her fear didn't fade. She lived in constant anticipation that her health would collapse again at any moment. It was her husband who finally named what she couldn't. The illness may have receded, but the trauma had not. Her body was healing, but her nervous system wasn't. What emerged from that conversation is her new book that came out just this week, But You Look Fine, an earnest guide to getting through the dark tunnel of what she calls medical trauma brain, the lingering imprint of illness that doesn't disappear just because the diagnosis improves. I was really particularly interested in this because I suffered an invisible neurological illness when I was a child that didn't actually remediate until I was in my late teens to early 20s when I stopped taking medication, etc. But my very first therapy was about feeling like I had to be careful, feeling like having a sense of still being sick, or that I needed to somehow walk on eggshells when I didn't anymore. And I've also had many clients with invisible illnesses, chronic invisible illnesses that have been very hard to diagnose. So the actual trauma of it is also how long it takes to find the right answer. Mark Hyman, of course, who's a doctor, has already called the book Paradigm Shifting, and Amy has appeared on Good Morning America and all over the place exploring this topic. I know you will find this interesting, and if you know someone who's undergone this kind of trauma and work, please send this to them as well. First, we're going to hear from our long-standing sponsor, BetterHelp. The most common problem I hear from those seeking therapy is how hard it is to find a therapist, how long it takes, how vulnerable you feel asking around for names. BetterHelp solves those problems. After you make the first contact, their standard is to offer names of therapists to you in less than 2 days. And you can talk to them in a first session to see if it's a good fit. If so, you're on your way. But if not, rather than going through something awkward, you simply let BetterHelp know, and they'll ask what it was you didn't like and find someone else for you. You can text, chat, or talk virtually. All of those avenues are open to you. I'm a therapist because I got good therapy. I'd had no idea how much I could benefit from it, but I knew I wasn't seeing myself or my world clearly. Here's BetterHelp's offer for SelfWork listeners, 10% off your first month of sessions if you use this link, betterhelp.com/selfwork. You know, they say the best time to plant a tree is 30 years ago, but the next best is today. It's never too late to reach out and get help. BetterHelp.com/selfwork. And now, Amy Kurtz. Amy, I wanted you to know first off the bat for this interview that as I read your book, But You Look Fine, and I love the subtitle, by the way, Trapped in the Hell Between Sick and Well, that you and I are a very like mind about a lot of these things. And I was delighted. In fact, I'm going to send your book to two of my patients already who I can't wait for them to read it because it's really going to help them. So,
thank you so much. That's like the ultimate honor.
I'm always impressed by someone who takes their own struggle and what they've learned from it and then tries to help other people with that. So what I would love for you to do, Amy, is to say to the SelfWork audience, what was the personal experience you had that caused you to want to write a book about this medical trauma brain, as you call it?
Well, it's been a long and winding journey for me and many, many, many years, decades even of misdiagnosis. And I wrote my first book before I even really knew what I had. That was called Kicking Sick. But to answer your question, I knew that something was wrong after the press for my first book because I had realized that I had just adapted to treading water and that my baseline still wasn't, something was still wrong. I would come home and just feel so exhausted. And I went to my 36th doctor.
Yeah, you said that. Wow.
And that takes a lot, going from, it's not just a financial output, which is extreme and with people with invisible chronic complex illnesses, but it's emotional. You have very little hope left that somebody will finally give you a clear answer. And I brought
or
my
if
hair.
they don't know, they could say, I don't know, too. Right.
Oh, it's so funny that you say that because I actually asked a physician to endorse my first book. And when I wrote to him to ask him, he said, I thought that I had failed you. And I said, no, you set me free. Like your ability to say to me that I've tried everything I know is one of the best things a doctor can do.
Exactly.
Because it allows you to have agency and go find somebody who can help you in a different way. So it's so funny because he had thought that he failed me and I had thought, I'm so lucky that he just said that. So anyway, so I went to my 36th doctor. I hoped and prayed that he would have a different answer for me. I had heard wonderful things about him and he did all of his testing and I was bracing for what I thought would be another heartbreak. And he said, I'm very clear what's going on here. You have late stage neurological Lyme disease and co-infections. The bad news is that it's going to take a while and the treatment's hard. But the good news is you will feel like you have a new body. And that was a really profound moment for me because I felt so many things. Every bone in my body knew it was true. Everything inside me knew it was true.
Because you've done your research and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
I just felt it. I knew it. It was finally the right answer. And that also gave me a lot that I could do about it. Whereas so many patients who struggle with invisible illness or misdiagnosis, it's like they don't know what to do. So they're doing so many things that they don't even know what's working anymore. And this, I was like, okay, I can wrap my head around this. I can do the treatments. I will push as hard as I can because I can get better from this. And I did. And I got so much better that I probably feel better than I've ever felt in my whole life. And I had physical symptoms starting at 14. I'm 41.
My gosh.
So I got the proper diagnosis at 35. And with his help, I got better and better and better. And it wasn't easy, but I was like, wow, like my life is taking a turn in a different direction than I've been able to see it for so long. But what happened was not something I expected, nor did I have language for, which was that I physically felt better. And that made room for me feeling bad mentally. I felt like I went from sick in the body to sick in the head. And I didn't know what was happening to me. I was having extreme hypervigilance, extreme fear that the onset of any symptom that reminded me of how bad it was could take me back like that to exactly how sick I was. I was obsessive if I felt that anything could get worse. I just felt like I was so tense and I couldn't stop. And I didn't know why I was feeling that way. And it was like I physically got better, but my mind didn't get the memo. Mm-hmm. So then I started to talk to physicians and say, hey, is this something that you've seen? Because I'm having debilitating anxiety. And the person who brought it up to me was my husband, not a doctor. And have you seen this before? And when I would say it, they would say, oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, now that you mention it, I've had patients who it's like they're better, but they're not acting as if they're better. Mm-hmm. And I said, that's exactly it. What's the name? Nobody could tell me. Mm-hmm. So then I started interviewing thousands of patients for what became this book. And everyone said, this is exactly how I feel. Mm-hmm. So I decided to name it medical trauma brain, or MTB, which sounds pretty obvious when you think about it, because society has this expectation that you go from sick to well and that there's nothing in between. But it's literally completely impossible to separate the physical body from the mental, spiritual, emotional self. And by having that expectation, it's detrimental to a patient who has suffered through a tremendous adversity, whether it's chronic, invisible, acute, an accident, and now they're in pain. It applies to everybody. Mm-hmm. And when I started to interview people, I would say, like, do you get so anxious at the onset of anything? And they all, with all different conditions, even people who are in remission from cancer, said, this is exactly how I feel.
Yes, I see it all the time as a therapist. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, I love that because I couldn't find it. So I decided that I would create a roadmap for patients to address this illness after the illness. Otherwise, what it felt like to me is, I describe it as the Shadowlands in my book, but it was like I was better and I was out with my friends and I was there and I loved them and we were having a great time and I did feel connected to them. But my mind, like a big part of me, was somewhere so far away, locked in a sandstorm desert with no way out. And that is trauma. But what makes this different from different kinds of trauma, and I'd love your insight on this, is post-traumatic stress disorder is, in doing my research, that it happens when one singular traumatic event happens, right?
Yeah. Yes. CPTSD, chronic or complex PTSD, is supposed to then fill that out to say, this is when the traumas are more elongated, that they happen over a longer period of time, and yet they have the same power. Whereas a lot of times with CPTSD, or again complex post-traumatic stress disorder, it invades you. Of course, everything with PTSD is an invasion, but it becomes your chronic way of being.
Oh, 1,000%. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And with complex post-traumatic stress, it felt more like that, what I was experiencing. However, the difference was that the threat was my body, because I no longer felt safe inside myself. And that had happened as a result of having the rug ripped out from under me, my body not functioning the way that it was supposed to at such a young age. And it's like you literally feel like your body's the threat.
Or anything that might intrude upon the body. Is that what that's what you mean? You call it functional freeze.
Yeah. Well, what happens when you get sick is that you automatically leap into a place of survival stress, where you're surviving. And I went from being an actor and having my whole life in front of me at 25 to getting so sick I could barely move or keep food down or function, and moving back home with my parents. But it was literally like, I always thought I'll just get right back to it. I'm going to deal with this emergency and then I'm going to get right back to it. I'll get right back to it. But the truth is that nothing is where I left it. Like I was 41 and it felt like I went from 25 to 41 and blinked. And there's this part of my life that feels like this gap in space. And I've worked very hard on myself. I've done a lot of trauma work and therapy, but just because your body comes out of survival stress doesn't mean that your mind got the memo. My mind was on a hamster wheel and I was frozen in fear. And I think this is a universal experience that just hasn't really been talked about yet.
So what did all these people that you talked to or interviewed or whatever, what were some of their stories? Maybe that would be a good place to.
Oh, I love this. Yeah. So, I mean, I spoke with someone who had hemiplegic migraines, and anyone who has ever had a migraine knows how debilitating and painful that can be. She went to, I think she had 300 appointments with a doctor who hadn't helped her.
Oof.
And she said that when I told her the idea for the book, she was like, a light bulb just went off inside me. I actually realized that I don't have migraines anymore. And yet I'm acting as if I'm always about to get one again. And I never thought about that before. Or my friend she's like, I've already popped an Advil and I'm in a dark room before I even see if it's going to happen, because I'm anticipating that or bracing for impact that it will happen.
Sure.
That one was super powerful for me. Another one was a former cancer patient who was in remission, and she would just get debilitating. She would have, she explained it like disassociation and extreme fear before she would go back in for the scan. Another person had Lyme disease like I did and got it very young. And she just would feel this like deep sense of disconnection with the outside world at the onset of any flare up. And so I talked to people across all boards, and it was just this universal feeling of launching into action before there was even necessarily a threat.
It's a little like generalized anxiety disorder, where you can actually visualize these horrible things happening, and and then you see them or you feel them and you have this anxiety about them, and yet they have not happened, and so it is a little bit like that, it sounds like. But, I'm sitting here thinking, so if this person who's cancer in remission or whose Lyme disease doesn't, and I don't know the correct word, is it in remission as well, or is it, okay. So they go back to that same doctor and say, well, I got all these, this hypervigilance, this even anger, this, fear, intense fear. And they look at him and go, well,
but you're fine. Yeah,
you're fine. What are you talking about? We healed you. And that's where they'd stop. But it sounds like, especially you really describe it so well. I especially like your description of medical gaslighting, which is the doctor would say, I don't know how to fix you, but you don't know what you're talking about.
That's the silent message.
Right.
Do you know that 76% of women have experienced medical gaslighting?
Oh yeah, yes.
That's from a Harvard study.
Yeah, that does not surprise me. And you also stress the fact, Amy, that this is often, a non-holistic, and you really stress going to a functional, integrative specialist or doctor, but how Western medicine especially fails us in this way, because they see it as it's a physical symptom. It's not a systemic disease that would include also mental health and emotional health.
Well, modern medicine is incredible and it's life-saving. Sure. And especially with acute conditions. I come from a long lineage of Western-minded physicians. I respect it. And at the same time, for people with multiple complex, chronic, invisible conditions, we're not black and white. And we can't go to a specialist for each separate thing because they're all interconnected. And so for me, it felt like I was kind of like waiting around in the land of the lost. And it also put more stress on me because I felt like if I don't take care and manage all of this myself, I won't get better. And so the system is very black and white. And we're one of the only countries in the world that doesn't associate the mind with the body. And there's no disconnecting them. And it's detrimental to the patient. So it doesn't surprise me in any way, shape, or form if a patient would go back to their doctor once they're better or on their way to healing and not even bring up what they're feeling because they don't know what they're feeling because nobody ever told them that this could be a response once you're better.
Yeah.
And I believe that if you don't heal the underlying trauma from having been sick, you will always have a ghost walking around behind you.
So let's take a break and we'll be back in just a moment. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. For some, summer is their favorite season. Travel picks up, kids are out of school, and adventure is the focus. But for others, juggling it all can be tough and can lead to overwhelm and counting down the minutes until the kids are back in school, while others worry they're wasting the days of sunshine. Therapy can seem like something that has to wait until the fall when things become more routine once again. But that's the wonderful thing about BetterHelp. You're not tied down to going to someone's office. You can talk to your therapist while you're driving. You can text as the kids are down for a nap or visiting with grandma and granddad. You can have a virtual session from anywhere that has Wi-Fi. So your own self-care, or as I like to say, your self-work, doesn't have to stop. You don't have to just survive the summer. You can thrive. As added reassurance, BetterHelp therapists work according to a strict code of conduct and are fully licensed in the U.S. You get the freedom of virtual therapy while not sacrificing quality. You don't have to say yes to everything this summer. Find support in therapy. Sign up and get 10% off at BetterHelp.com. That's better, HELP.com. So we're talking about fear and hypervigilance, which fall in the rubric, although I don't want to get too compartmentalized here, of anxiety. But what about depression, sadness, emptiness, hopelessness? What part of all this is that?
I don't think there's any way to separate them.
Okay.
I
thought that's what you were going to say.
I mean, first there's the things that lead to what I call MTB. One of them is the realization that you're actually maybe in this for a long haul in a way that you didn't expect. And that your identity is having to change. I mean, for me, I literally went from this fully vibrant person to a patient. And then when you're better, so there's the processing while it's happening. Then there's the invalidation and the gaslighting, which you literally shelve. This is what a trauma response is. Like you literally shelve it for later because you are in survival and you have to deal with what's going on and you need the doctor's help. And yet all of that stuff that got stuffed aside for later comes down for the taking. And that was so painful for me. I had a lot of grief when I got my diagnosis because of all the years lost. And I felt tremendous sadness for my younger self.
Yeah,
but
of course,
we also live in a space and society that says, just get back up on the horse. The horse has left. The cruise ship is gone. Nothing is the same. Every part of you has changed in every single way. And so has every relationship you have.
Exactly.
It's a crucible effect. It's the axis on which everything functions completely shifts when you get sick. And there's nothing about you that will ever be the same in any way. And for me, I'll just share this because I think it's relevant, but I didn't really realize how sad I was. And I had been going to talk therapy for 10 years. So it's not like I thought I was doing all the things.
Right.
But it wasn't until I was physically better that I mentally could handle the load of the tremendous sadness that I felt and allow myself to feel it. It wasn't until I was watching a show called This Is Us. I don't know if anybody.
Oh yeah, sure. I love that show.
So my husband and I love it because we like a good cry, and we were like so invested in it. And this is no spoiler alert to anyone who's watching or listening, but in one of the episodes, the kids are going to talk to the matriarch of the family, and something happened to me where I had such a guttural, deep cry. I literally had a stuffed nose for 3 days. That's how much I sobbed. And I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to let it out. And then when I went to therapy, I started to understand that I had always thought when I was young, I'd be a mother. And then I thought when I was sick, I'll just not now, later, not now, later, not now, later. And now I'm 41 and I'm better. And my body's been through such a war. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't that it's too late. It's just that I lost the ability to choose when, how, and at what time.
Right. Right.
And like I said, it felt like I blinked and I went 15 years into a time warp. But this happens all the time with patients who struggle with really debilitating illness, because your whole focus and attention has to be on the thing that needs it. And then chunks of your life just go by. And if you don't process the pain, like you can't pave over your pain. If you try to do that.
You don't mean physical pain, you mean emotional pain and emotional loss.
Like there's no paving over emotional pain. If you try to do it, you'll be wearing a mask, and that just keeps you more isolated. I literally think we have a loneliness epidemic in our country, and I can't think of anything more lonely than living with an invisible illness when everybody says you look fine.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if you know this. I have written both a book and now a workbook called Perfectly Hidden Depression. So that's a part of why you and I are so in sync, because the things that people keep stuffed away and compartmentalized, and then they think they're not being grateful enough for what has happened to them, like their long COVID is better, or their Lyme disease is, or cancer is remitted. It's as if they don't. It feels like weakness somehow to them to think, well, wait a minute, there's emotional work to be done. No, I should just be grateful, So anyway, it's
I love that. That's such a good point, because we also live in a society that applauds pushing through
resilience.
Things.
Sure.
And like just moving to the next thing, and you're successful if you accomplish. And if you don't, you're not. So it puts this expectation on, well, now I'm better, so I guess I'm better. But inside, I'm experiencing a soul-crushing grief.
Right.
And I didn't have a word or language or a way out. I just knew that I was feeling something that felt horrific inside. Mm-hmm. And that's really why I wrote this book, because you're not fine after.
Well, you said I didn't really quite get this. You said you disagreed with yourself, that you were saying something in Kicking, what is it? Kicking Sick? Your first book, that you now disagreed with yourself and said something about, I think now I've lived through this more. I've changed my mind about certain things.
Well, that book was a resource guide for women to thrive through an incredibly hard, challenging moment and make it transformative instead of sidelining. When I was 25 and so sick and so scared and not knowing really what was going on, all I could find was how to be sick and tired, literally. And I just was never, that's just not me. I was never going to subscribe to that. And I had put so much time, energy, and money trying to see people who would help me. So I really wanted it to be like a one-stop shop for how to learn to live with something challenging and be transformed at the same time. The problem is that I looked like a glowing picture of health and happiness on the cover. And it wasn't until the press where I would go home and just be like, how am I going to do this. Like I have to put on this mask because I'm not okay, but there's no time to deal with that now. Then I went back and got my correct diagnosis. But it wasn't until then that, my first book is all about living well with a chronic condition. This book is so different in that it's about what happens next.
Yeah.
And I love what you shared. Dr. Gabor Mate shared something so beautiful in the book about what happens to you when you wear a mask and how isolated it makes you.
Very, very lonely.
Yeah.
I did lots of, not as many as you, but I did about 60 interviews gathering information about what they were identifying about perfectly hidden depression that fit for them. And so I talked over about a year and a half with all these people, and I said, why would you reach out to some therapist? You have no clue who I am, whether you can really trust me or not. You're just sort of blindly trusting me, which I so am honored by. But why would you do that? You're a brain surgeon. You're an ad agent. You're a head of an advertising agency. You're had one motivational speaker. And I said, and they literally, Amy said, because I would not want anyone to live this way. I have been so lonely. I just have not had real connection.
Oh,
So,
make me cry.
Yeah, I know. Talk a little bit about how, because there's an ongoing debate right now, Bessel van der Kolk and everything says trauma lives in your body. And there's been other researchers recently have said, no, it doesn't. And you make the statement of trauma lives in your autonomic nervous system. And so, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I love The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And for me, that's proved absolutely true in so many more ways than one, like beyond what I could even talk about today. But there have been things even in EMDR therapy that have come up that I literally didn't remember. And yet my body knew it the whole time.
Yep.
And so when I say that it lives in the autonomic nervous system, it can't leave the body unless you're doing trauma-based therapy. And, you'll see it if you see somebody who's done trauma work and had serious like abuse as a child or something like that, where you literally feel them like they're like tightly wound, and then they do the therapies and they're calm because their nervous system calms down. And in my opinion, you can't heal trauma unless you work on the nervous system. That's where trauma lives. And Gabor Mate says that trauma isn't what happens to you. It's a psychic wound that happens as a result of what happened to you. And I couldn't agree with that more. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with him too. And I think that people, that's a hard concept. I think mainly because, especially in our Western culture, you are supposed to, again, we used the word resilience a few minutes ago. You're supposed to be resilient. And that stuff, when you think, I don't want to believe that it has left some kind of permanent mark. And it's not permanent, but it is there, and it's lodged there, and it's lodged in your body's reaction. I had never thought of early medical operations and medical trauma as something that might be traumatic for a child. But when I was about a little over 1, I had my tonsils taken out because of an infection that was killing me, basically. And I thought, I looked up, how did children's hospitals treat children in 1955?
Oh,
which is when I would have, they would tie them down. They had to tie them down to keep them in their beds, and because their parents weren't allowed to be there and that kind of thing. Well, guess what? I just freak out about. I freak out if somebody holds me down, even if it's playful. And once I understood that, it was like, oh, that's where that comes from. And I had never made the connection that could be actual trauma that had lodged itself in my autonomic nervous system. I
That's really
also was
wonderful when you make that kind of connection.
neurologically not well as a kid. And my very first therapy, Amy, was about, I still thought of myself as sick at 23, 24 years old. I still was, I still believed that if I got in certain circumstances, they were dangerous, just like you're talking about. And I had to kind of go through this work of healing the emotional part of it I really had never addressed. So,
Yeah. I also think it's interesting to me. I'm curious. This is so random, but I'm just curious your thought about it, which is that I find it interesting when children have been through illness and some of them don't connect themselves to it at all.
no.
And then some do. And I'm always curious about how they were raised and what the relationship was with their parents and how the relationship was around the illness.
Exactly. I think that's right on target, that it probably depends to a great extent on how centered the parents were on the illness itself.
Yeah.
And did they allow the child to have emotional reactions and responses to their illness, or did they not? What would be your thoughts about it?
I mean, I'm not a doctor, but
Doesn't matter.
I feel that it really matters how much emphasis is put on it and around it, how much like pressure there is around it, the stress level of the parents, and also, I just think that getting anyone who's going through a really scary thing at any age should have a mental emotional therapist. Because you need to be, you can't stuff it down. It will just come up later.
Right. That's so exactly right.
It's like, it almost feels like it's like stuffed to the top. And then once you start doing trauma work or even cognitive behavioral therapy, for me was like, oh, whoa, there's a lot in here that's got to come up.
Yeah. What am I telling myself? What are my beliefs about this? And that kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. Well, so
I also think one of the things, if it's okay, that I just made me think of is that it's a mistake to accept the notion of a binary that you're either sick or you're well, because it's not black and white. And the truth is, so many people are suffering in the gray. But it's a really key balance to strike, which is processing the grief of who you once were with the dreams of who you'd become. And one of the things that I came up against in myself that I think people will resonate with is I saw my life as like before I got sick and after.
Right.
But it took me a long time to realize that even though this wasn't the life that I thought that I had, even though I didn't move to LA, I couldn't continue my professional career as an actor, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And just because I couldn't act, I took my love and my need for deep creative expression and just put it into a different modality. And now I'm helping other people who feel totally alone in their health experience. But there's a great opportunity for post-traumatic growth after the storm has settled, for you to learn about yourself, like in a really deep, profound way. And I can honestly say that while I would wish my experience on no one, I have learned about myself in such a deep way. I have a relationship with myself. I'm literally listening to what my body is telling me. I never did that my whole life. I meditate every morning. I understand the importance of feeding myself well, of doing de-stressing practices, of going to sleep and getting good rest. Like, I love that now. And I just would never have cared for myself in this way had I not gone through something so entirely life altering.
Yeah, sure.
And there really is hope. Like, even when you feel like you're deep and dark inside of a well and that you don't have a ladder to climb out of, there is always something you can do to improve your quality of life, no matter what.
Well, but I certainly don't want to stop this until we get to, you call it solving your way to health. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So that's sort of how I think about being an empowered patient, because it's like any authority figure. When you're young, you look to your parent or your caregiver to help you be safe. Mm-hmm. And when you're a patient, you look to a doctor because they went to medical school and they know what they're doing and you don't. But here's the thing. You got yourself to the doctor.
Yeah, that's right.
You knew something was wrong. Mm-hmm. What did you say?
I said, give yourself credit for that.
You were the one that knew something was wrong. Mm-hmm. And if you want to fully heal, it is incredibly important that you have agency. And the way that you have agency through a very disempowering system and process is you don't have to go to every doctor that you see and stick with them. You can get to know yourself and be really clear on what do I need from a person who is partnering with me on my way to health.
Sure.
And it's crucial that you have a doctor that sees it that way. Mm-hmm. Because you don't just need somebody to tell you X, Y, and Z works. You need someone who's going to empower you to be in the driver's seat of your health. And then here's the other thing. Mark Hyman said that 80% of what we do for our health and well-being is outside of the doctor's office. That's entirely up to the patient.
Right.
And that includes diet, the air you breathe, the environment you live in, the way that you have stress reduction techniques, the way you express and get help for emotional health and well-being. I could go on, but all of those things are yours to do.
Exactly.
And nobody really talks about that. And they make a huge difference. And you have to look at it, no matter how you feel, as that you are 50-50 in getting yourself better. And if somebody's not treating you well, get a new doctor. Sure. Just because someone's the best doesn't mean that it's the best for everyone, and doesn't mean you have to stay with them forever if it ends up not working out. You're in charge. But there's this expectation that you're not, you feel like you're not. Because
that once you adopt once you say, but I'm the patient, then that is something that relegates you to some sort of submission or following the doctor's lead or something rather. Now, I think you would agree with me that there are a lot of people who that scares the hell out of them to think that they're in charge. And so, I
was one of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I was like, just take it for me. And just tell me what to do, because this is too overwhelming in every way, shape, and form.
Right.
But the problem is that I was throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick. I was doing 8 million things. I didn't know what was even doing what. And I was allowing things to happen that my body didn't feel good about. Like, this is a very basic example, but I talk a lot about what it means to listen to your body. Mm-hmm. I went to one nurse. She pricked me like 7 times and didn't get the vein. The whole time I thought, she's not the right nurse. I should be asking for another nurse. But instead of me using my voice and saying, that's enough, like my arm hurts, can I switch to someone else? And not feeling bad about it, I let her do it.
Right.
And then I didn't ruminate on it until later, when I was like, why did I do that? Why did I allow someone to hurt me and not take charge?
I have to tell you a funny story. I had a heart cath. I've been in this area for, a long time, and I was scheduled for a heart cath, and this nurse walked in, and I was getting all prepped and everything. And she said, "Oh, Dr. Rutherford." And I kind of looked at her, and she said, "You saw me and my ex-husband years ago." And I said, "Well, he's your ex." And I said, "Do you have any negative feelings toward me?" She said, "No, you were good. You really helped." But, we ended up divorcing because I just didn't want any bad juju. So I was taking control.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this book is like to say, don't do what I did, do as I'm urging you to do.
Yeah.
Understand that in a country where 194 million Americans have at least one chronic health condition, if you don't get in the driver's seat, you're just going to live with it unless you're lucky. And it's an opportunity to learn to trust yourself, to value your instincts, to listen to the signals that your body's giving you, which oftentimes, if you aren't careful, you can feel a lot of mistrust for yourself.
Sure.
And I just think this is an opportunity to realize that you're actually in charge.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. And I agree with you. So your book is But You Look Fine, Trapped in the Hell Between Sick and Well, and How to Break Free. So, and it comes out June the 9th. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Anything that you might say in closing, or how people get in touch with you if someone wants to work with you?
Yeah. So I would say first that I would love to end with millions of us are suffering in silence from an invisible wound that doctors don't diagnose, that no one talks about, and that patients don't admit to. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
So that's where I want to leave.
That's a great comment. Doesn't have
anyone
to be that
who
way.
wants to find me can come to amykurtz.com, or my book will be anywhere that books are sold. And my Instagram handle is _Amy Kurtz. I would love for anyone to come and say hi. And I'm so grateful for you having me on today.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Thanks for being on.
Thank you.
You may have noticed in your feed this past week that we were asked by the How To podcast to feature one of their downloaded episodes. And this one was on using psychedelics for your mental health. I found it a fascinating discussion and wanted to pass it on to you. So again, it's in my podcast feed, which you can find anywhere you listen to SelfWork, on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. You can also join the conversation with me that I have with people every week in my newsletter at drmargaretrutherford.com. Just subscribe. You'll also get a free ebook. More and more of you are subscribing because I think you trust that I'm not going to send you a bunch of stuff all the time. I do have one issue that I wanted to bring up. I'm a Psychology Today columnist, and there's a new feature on Psychology Today that you can create your own email list, which will alert anyone on it that you have a new Psychology Today post. I only do it about 6 times a year, but I am thinking about doing that because some of you might like to keep up with that. But I haven't decided yet. If you have any strong feelings about it, let me know at AskDrMargaret at drmargaretrutherford.com. I'm always very grateful that you choose to spend your time listening to SelfWork. Please leave me a message at SpeakPipe and a voicemail message. I'd love to hear from you yourself. Or you can always contact me either via my website or at AskDrMargaret at drmargaretrutherford.com. So thank you for being here. Please take care of yourself, your loved ones, and your community. And please send this to someone who may be suffering with medical trauma brain. I'm Dr. Margaret, and this has been SelfWork.